Hi, my name is Blair Cade. For as long as I can remember, my name was something of a shadow. No one really used it, not at family gatherings, not in news articles, not even in the glossy invitations to events I helped organize. I was always the second, the quieter, the background to someone else's story. Her story. My sister Isolde's story. The one everyone admired. The one everyone remembered. But that day in the crowded hallway, when she struck me with her hand, all eyes on us, and Dorian, my billionaire husband, roared, "If you touch her again, I'll bury you!" In that moment, my existence snapped into sharp focus. Suddenly, they remembered me. Suddenly, my name mattered, but the pain wasn't new. It had been years in the making, a slow erosion of my presence, my identity, my recognition. It began with small erasures, invisible yet stinging. The scholarship I'd earned with sleepless nights and tireless effort stolen by Isolde under the guise of family support. The countless times she claimed my ideas as her own, the subtle undermining that left me questioning my own worth. And my mother, Velma Quayle, she wasn't an ally either. She smiled while dismissing me, complimented Isolde while ignoring my successes, brushed over the moments that should have celebrated me. It was not just indifference, it was deliberate. And as I stood under the chandeliers, the soft lights of the Charleston Garden venue twinkling above, dressed in white, clutching my bouquet with fingers tight enough to leave marks on the lace, I felt the sting of neglect like 1,000 tiny cuts. They called me her sister, the younger one, never by the name that belonged to me. They praised Isolde, laughed with her, photographed her. Not once did they pause to truly see me. That silence, that calculated overlooking, it carved itself into my memory like a wound that never healed. Even in moments that should have been mine, my wedding, my achievements, the foundation events I meticulously helped organize, my name remained absent. Only her story shone, and everyone else, including the people who were supposed to love me most, helped craft it. They had rewritten my life so thoroughly that I began to question whether my own reflection was authentic, whether the voice that had whispered dreams in the dead of night belonged to me or to the expectations piled upon me by a family that saw me as less than worthy. And yet, that hallway, the slap, Dorian's voice cutting through the air like a blade, reminded me I exist. I am here. I am Blair Cade, and the years of quiet submission, of swallowing betrayal, of pretending to be invisible, those days were numbered. I would not allow the story of my life to be dictated by those who saw me only as a footnote. The memories came back in waves, each one sharper than the last, refusing to let me ignore the pattern of betrayal and erasure that had haunted my life. I remember being 12, standing in the schoolyard while Isolde emerged first from the car, her hair braided perfectly, ribbons aligned like clockwork, and me trailing behind with scuffed shoes, peanut butter smudges on my shirt, trying to keep up, hoping no one would notice the difference. My mother would call out, her voice warm yet laced with distraction, "ISA, grab your sister, BL, come on, girls." Always the pause, always the correction that subtly reminded me I was second. I was the filler. I tried small rebellions, adding an E at the end of my name, signing my birthday card Blair, in the hope that it would make me more visible, more graceful in the eyes of the world. My mother would glance, chuckle lightly, a tilt of her head. "You trying to be fancy now, sugar?" Never asking why, never acknowledging my effort, my individuality. Then came 17, the year I thought I had finally won. A full scholarship, earned with sleepless nights of essays, interviews, and part-time work stacked on top of school hours. I had conquered my own doubts. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, hands trembling, reading the acceptance letter 3 times before allowing myself to believe it was real. Isolde had come home from college that weekend, her expression a casual shrug as she said, "Oh, that's nice." Later, my mother entered my room, sitting on the edge of the bed in that soft, calculated posture, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "Sweetheart," she said, "your sister's struggling. She's thinking about transferring. It's stressful. What if we let her apply under your name, just this once? She won't use it, of course, but it might open doors." I stared at her, disbelief curling in my chest like smoke. That was it. The scholarship evaporated, stolen not by chance, but orchestrated by the people sworn to protect me. Weeks later, The university called, confused by the sudden enrollment switch. I did nothing. I walked barefoot into the backyard, letting the cold grass bite at my feet, folding the letter into a drawer I never opened again. My dreams, my hard work, packed neatly into Isolde's suitcase as she flew to Europe that fall, embarking on a new program, a new city, while I swallowed my disappointment like it was medicine I had to choke down. No one asked me, no one apologized, no one validated my pain. And for years, that became my life, quietly watching as someone else lived my victories, spoke my words, claimed my triumphs. I didn't cry, I didn't fight. I survived by silencing my voice and shrinking further into the shadows. But that night before the gala, staring at my own reflection in the darkened room, reviewing press releases and digital flyers with my name conspicuously absent, the past and present collided in a way I couldn't ignore. I typed my name into the search bar, Blair Cade, and found nothing. I typed Isolde's, pages upon pages, old interviews, viral clips, op-eds she didn't write, awards she didn't earn. I realized the truth, cold and jagged. Even in my adult life, in my career, my contributions, my work, my very identity had been erased. My chest tightened, a dull, pressing ache. My hand hovered over the keyboard to draft a message to my mother, 3 lines typed, deleted, rewritten, because confronting years of betrayal was heavier than I anticipated. And then, as I stood at the hallway's edge in my robe, waiting for the knock I knew would come, I heard her voice, sweet, syrupy, familiar. "Blair, you coming? Everyone's waiting for me." The words slithered across the floorboards, reminding me of the countless moments she had taken, claimed, possessed, always performing, always orchestrating, always in control. And in that moment, something in me shifted. The old submission, the quiet acceptance, the apology I had whispered to a child-sized self, those things were no longer mine to give. I pulled the sweater over my dress, slipped into my heels, and stepped out, the familiar chill of anticipation and dread curling around my spine. The gala was never about me, it never had been. I was merely the accessory, the frame for Dorian's brilliance, for Isolde's spotlight, for everyone else's applause. The car waited, silent except for the faint hum of tires on asphalt. Dorian glanced up, smiled briefly, and squeezed my hand. "You look great," he said. I smiled back, a mask of calm hiding the storm inside. Every flash of the cameras outside felt like tiny punctures to my ego, reminders that I existed as a shadow, a background blur in everyone else's story. Reporters whispered among themselves. "Is that his oldest sister?" one murmured. I let it slide. I had grown accustomed to invisibility. But then I saw her, Isolde, crimson silk hugging her frame, every inch of her designed to captivate, her lips curling into the perfect, sweetly venomous smile that spoke. "Yes, look at me as you should." She approached, planted a dramatic kiss on Dorian's cheek, then turned her gaze toward me. "Blair," she said, voice laced with saccharine pride, "you finally wore color. I'm so proud." It was a jab masked in affection, a gentle squeeze of a knife in the softest way possible. I opened my mouth to respond, thought better of it, and closed it again. The night unfolded in fragments, speeches, applause, champagne, the flash of cameras capturing me in angles that rendered me a mere accessory to Dorian's presence. I wandered toward the dessert table for a moment of solitude, only to be tapped on the shoulder. A young staffer leaned in, whispering, "They're about to show the tribute video. You're going to love it." I nodded cautiously, unsure what to expect. The lights dimmed. A screen descended, and music swelled, triumphant and orchestral, the kind that tries to manipulate emotion. Photos of the foundation, children smiling, clinics restored, Dorian beaming, all familiar yet incomplete. And then my wedding appeared, my face frozen mid-laughter, cropped, a fragment of the memory, overlaid by Isolde's voice. My sister's, the words landed like bricks in my chest. Laughter followed in the room, polite, calculated, directed at her performance, not mine. I could barely breathe. The montage highlighted my absence in every moment, framing me as background, incidental, a footnote. My cheeks burned with humiliation. Dorian returned, a concerned murmur brushing past his lips. "What the hell was that?" I smiled anyway, for the cameras, for the room, because showing the truth now felt premature. Later, scrolling through my phone, I saw the same clip circulating across social media. TikTok edits, Instagram reels, hashtags mocking my presence, twisting my life into fodder for strangers' amusement. Dorian cursed under his breath beside me, tossing his phone aside, and I shook my head, knowing any defense would only escalate the spectacle. Alone later that night, curled in a throw blanket on our couch, I let the exhaustion seep in. My body ached from pretense, from hiding, from swallowing years of diminishment. I opened a box from the bedroom closet, old journals spilling memories across pages, half-finished thoughts, ideas buried under layers of obligation and suppression. My younger self, vibrant, alive, unafraid, she stared back at me from inked lines, reminding me who I had been, and more importantly, who I still could be. No validation from anyone else mattered now. I was ready to remember, to reclaim, to plan, not for public spectacle, not for applause, but for truth. The folders labeled receipts on my laptop glowed under the dim light, a digital testament to the life that had been stolen, proof that I had been wronged, and more importantly, that I had survived. That night, as the world outside slept, I realized that for the first time, the power to write my own story was entirely in my hands, and the reflection staring back at me in the darkened screen whispered something fierce. They had underestimated me. They had assumed I would always be silent. But silence had a limit, and mine had ended. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors of our home, casting long, sharp lines like accusations across my chest. I brewed coffee, the scent strong and grounding, the steam curling upward in lazy spirals as if reminding me that life continued, indifferent to my pain. I skipped breakfast, a silent protest to the hollow performance of the night before. My phone buzzed insistently, an unexpected message lighting up the screen. Marcy, one of the senior coordinators at the Keats Foundation, her name flashing like an alarm. "Hi, Blair. There's a problem with the women's grant program. Your name is on the paperwork." My fingers froze, trembling slightly as if electricity had surged through them. "What paperwork?" I typed back. My heart thudded. The PR partnership with Bell Communications, the launch last week, the contracts, branding, the digital signatures, all under my name. Someone had forged it, and the evidence of my supposed culpability glared at me like a warning. And I knew exactly who it was. ISA, Isolde, the sister who had turned my life into a performance piece for her amusement, who thrived on public approval while erasing my identity in private. I grabbed my keys, the cold metal grounding me, and left. The drive to my mother's house was a study in tension, quiet streets reflecting sunlight in tiny, accusatory sparks. Each passing car, each windshield gleaming, felt like judgment. I arrived at the familiar, white-shuttered house, perfectly trimmed hedges, the doormat with its ironic cheer. Bless this mess. I knocked, and the door opened before I could hesitate. There she stood, Velma Quayle, pressed blouse, lipstick perfectly applied, eyes calculating, ready for a confrontation she didn't expect. "Well," she said, glancing at the driveway. "No, Dorian, this is about me, not him." The words slid past me like poison, masking control under casual tone. I stepped inside, the scent of lemon polish and artificial hominess hitting me, nauseating and sharp, a sensory echo of a childhood spent performing to meet impossible standards. The dining room felt staged, every chair in place, every surface gleaming. Velma gestured to one. "Sit." Her hands moved like a conductor's, orchestrating my submission before I even spoke. "Mom," I said, voice calm but edged, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not deflect." She stiffened, the first crack in her armor. "I don't like that tone," she replied, but it was too late. I held her gaze. Someone has forged my signature, used my name in a contract, and I know exactly who it is. "Mom, I need the truth. No excuses." Her eyes flickered, but no words of defense, no apology. Only the practiced excuse I'd heard for years. Isolde is ambitious. She didn't mean harm. She was under pressure. Family protects family. Each word was a blade in disguise, dismissing years of deceit, erasure, and subtle cruelty. I laughed, disbelief tight in my chest. Ambition? That was the excuse for betrayal. She had stolen scholarships, manipulated my life, used my name, erased my accomplishments, and now she had orchestrated a fraud, all with the shield of family. I leaned forward, voice sharp, the calm before the storm. That stops now. I will not be erased anymore. Every deception, every stolen opportunity, every whispered lie, I will reclaim what is mine, and you will witness it. Velma's composure wavered slightly, and for the first time, I saw hesitation, the tiniest crack in her calculated control. She reached for a teacup, the one from my childhood, the same small vessel that had always been a prop in her narrative of perfection and control. I stared at it, letting the weight of years and suppressed anger coalesce into a singular, focused resolve. This wasn't just about contracts or PR disasters. This was about reclaiming my identity, my name, my voice. For the first time, I was no longer the background. I was Blair Cade, and I was done shrinking. As she poured tea, unaware of the storm gathering within me, I opened my laptop in the next room. The receipts folder, previously dormant, called to me. Screenshots, emails, statements, videos, old interviews, everything she, Isolde, and my mother had tried to erase or manipulate had been saved. Every lie, every theft, every calculated omission would be accounted for. And I would become the mirror. The truth would no longer hide behind my silence. The fire inside me, calm yet undeniable, ignited fully in that moment. Back in the sanctuary of my bedroom, the laptop screen glowed like a lighthouse in the fog of my past, illuminating every betrayal, every injustice, every stolen fragment of my life. I opened the truth folder I had started that night, dragging videos, emails, screenshots, and documents into one place, a digital archive of all the wrongs that had been inflicted on me. I paused, staring at the first file. Playroom 2002. My 9-year-old self, round-faced, innocent, arranging teacups in a cross-legged circle, oblivious to the looming shadow of my sister. And then Isolde appeared in the frame, walking in with the certainty of a conqueror. She shoved me, and my mother, Velma, sided with her, comforting her while ignoring my pain. Watching it now, I saw it differently. I wasn't clumsy. I wasn't the villain. I was a child, gaslit, erased, and silenced. That realization burned inside me, a molten core of anger and clarity. I spent hours revisiting every document, every photo, every video clip I had saved over the years. Each one was a puzzle piece of a life rewritten by other selfish ambitions. I labeled, categorized, cross-referenced. The patterns were unmistakable: Isolde's manipulations, my mother's passive complicity, the subtle way they'd shaped public perception, so I would be invisible. But this time, I was not invisible. This time, I had the advantage. I had evidence. I had control. And I had patience. I sipped cold coffee, the bitter taste grounding me as I mapped out a strategy. The first step was reclamation, public acknowledgement of my work, my name, my contributions. The second step would be exposure, but only at the right time with precision. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about truth, justice, and restoration of my identity. The meticulous planning consumed me, yet it felt exhilarating. For years, I had been reactive, silent, allowing others to dictate my life. Now, for the first time, I was proactive. I drafted letters, rehearsed confrontations, and began contacting allies who could corroborate my work, my contributions, and my experiences. I contacted former colleagues, friends from university, mentors, anyone who could vouch for the authenticity of my accomplishments. Each conversation, each confirmation, added to a growing network of validation that would become the foundation of my counterattack. In the evenings, I returned to my journals, reading the words of my younger self, realizing that the fire I thought had been extinguished had only been dormant. The girl who had written her dreams in ink and paper, who had believed she mattered, was still alive inside me. And now, she was not only alive, she was armed. I mapped out every social media post, every viral clip, every article where my name had been erased or misattributed. I made lists, timelines, and dossiers. Each step was deliberate. Each move was calculated. I wasn't merely reacting. I was strategizing a systematic reclamation of my life. And through it all, The anger that had once threatened to consume me transformed into clarity. Anger was reaction, strategy was power. I worked late into the night, my hands trembling not from exhaustion but from anticipation. Each piece of evidence, each recollection, strengthened my resolve. I realized I had been preparing for this my entire life, unconsciously, surviving every slight, every betrayal, every omission. And now, the time had come to transform survival into action. This wasn't a moment of vengeance born from impulse. It was a long-planned awakening. I wasn't going to shout or scream. I wasn't going to post impulsively. I would move like a shadow, precise, deliberate, unstoppable. Every lie would be countered. Every erasure would be corrected. Every insult, every humiliation, every act of betrayal would be met with evidence, with undeniable truth. And when the world saw the full picture, the roles would be reversed. They had built a narrative at my expense, and now I would rewrite it on my terms. I was Blair Cade, and the girl who had once been invisible, erased, dismissed, and overlooked was finally visible, fully realized and ready to strike, not recklessly but with surgical precision. The first move had to be subtle, almost invisible, a quiet reclamation that would unsettle them before they realized what was happening. I scheduled a series of meetings with key stakeholders at the Keats Foundation, careful to position myself not as a victim, but as an informed, authoritative participant. My voice, calm but firm, carried a weight that surprised even me. I presented documents, past correspondences, and verified project outcomes, highlighting initiatives that had been quietly attributed to others. Isolde, my mother, even Dorian's name in some cases. Their eyes widened, sometimes with shock, often with irritation masked as confusion. Every subtle correction, every gentle insertion of truth, was a chess move, placing me closer to visibility and control. Simultaneously, I began a digital audit of social media. I combed through viral posts, blog articles, and news clippings, cataloging every instance where my contributions had been omitted or misrepresented. I drafted polite yet firm correction requests, meticulously citing evidence, keeping the tone professional yet undeniable. The response was immediate in some circles, delayed in others, but progress was visible. Slowly, my name began to resurface, my role recognized where it had once been erased. But public acknowledgement alone wasn't enough. Private accountability had to follow. I reached out to former colleagues who had worked directly with Isolde on the Bell Communications project, asking questions with careful neutrality, listening to stories that confirmed the same manipulations I had endured for years. Their words, unfiltered, offered me both validation and strategy. I noted patterns, repeated behaviors, and predictable lies, mapping them in a mental dossier that I could deploy when the time was right. That evening, I prepared for a personal confrontation with Isolde. She was the epicenter of the storm, the one who had rewritten my childhood, sabotaged my adolescence, and humiliated me in adulthood. I knew she would resist, deflect, and charm, but I had learned her tactics. I rehearsed my statements, anticipating her words and planning my responses, each one aimed at exposing the truth without hysteria, without the weakness of emotion undermining my power. When I arrived at her apartment, she greeted me with that familiar, insufferable smile, a performance perfected over years. "Blair," she said, soft and mocking, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" I smiled back, controlled, deliberate, allowing no hint of fear or anger to escape. "I came to talk about the projects," I said, voice steady. She tilted her head, suspicion flashing, but curiosity too. "Projects?" she asked. "You mean the ones where my name appears everywhere and yours nowhere?" I held her gaze. "Exactly. Let's review the details." I watched her carefully as I methodically walked through the evidence, timeline by timeline, email by email, documenting every omission, every lie, every calculated manipulation. Her confidence faltered, just a fraction, but enough. The smile twitched, the laugh strained. I maintained composure, never raising my voice, never letting judgment appear in my expression. Every word, every reference, was a mirror, reflecting her own misdeeds back at her. By the time the conversation ended, Isolde was pale, her defenses cracking under the weight of undeniable proof. She attempted excuses, but I was unyielding, precise, controlled. This wasn't about anger, it was about reclamation, a patient dismantling of the narrative that had been built to diminish me. That night, driving home, I realized something profound. Fear was the new currency. Not mine, never mine, but theirs. They had relied on my silence for decades. That silence had ended. The fire inside me, once simmering, now burned fiercely, illuminating every path forward. And I understood that the next steps, though delicate, would shift the balance completely. I wasn't just reclaiming my name, I was reclaiming power, influence, and dignity, and the consequences for those who had wronged me would be inevitable, calculated, and inescapable. The days that followed were a whirlwind of precise action, calculated risks, and silent victories. I continued to reclaim the narrative of my life, reaching out to journalists, bloggers, and industry influencers who had previously covered projects I had spearheaded but had been misattributed. Each conversation was carefully crafted, presenting facts, proof, and timelines that left no room for doubt. Slowly, my name began appearing alongside projects where it had once been absent. Mentors and colleagues, those who had witnessed my dedication firsthand, began speaking up, sharing their experiences publicly in subtle but effective ways. It was exhilarating to see the world finally catching up to the truth. Meanwhile, Isolde and my mother were visibly shaken, their composure fraying under the weight of my quiet but relentless strategy. Velma called more frequently, attempting to smooth over my concerns, but her words rang hollow. I remained polite, professional, and unflinching, never giving them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. I spent hours reviewing every interaction, documenting inconsistencies in their stories, noting emotional cues, timing, and behavior patterns. I became hyper-aware, almost predatory in my focus, each step deliberate, each move precise. Then came the social media phase, a careful, controlled revelation. I began posting highlights of my work, stories of past achievements, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of projects I had led. The posts were subtle, professional, and authentic, avoiding melodrama while clearly establishing my presence. The response was immediate. Likes, comments, shares, and inquiries began to flow in, and I noticed the silent panic in Isolde's demeanor every time she saw a post or read an article quoting me correctly. One evening, as I prepared my latest post, I reflected on the transformation I had undergone. The timid, erased Blair of years past had been replaced by someone unrecognizable even to myself, someone composed, strategic, and fiercely self-assured. The fire that had once simmered quietly now burned with controlled intensity, driving me forward with purpose and clarity. I realized that this was not just about reclaiming my achievements. It was about rewriting the story that had been imposed upon me, taking ownership of my identity, and refusing to let anyone diminish me again. My meticulous documentation allowed me to confront Isolde one last time, this time with the evidence displayed not in words alone but in undeniable facts, emails, contracts, and timelines meticulously compiled. I presented it to her calmly, letting each piece speak for itself, refusing to raise my voice or show anger, knowing that the weight of truth alone would have the greatest impact. Her attempts to deflect, manipulate, or charm were futile against the precision of my evidence. By the end of the conversation, she was visibly rattled, defensive cracks showing where confidence had once stood unchallenged. Velma, too, could no longer maintain her facade. The veneer of maternal authority and control that had shielded them both for years began to crumble as they realized that the silence and compliance they had relied upon were gone. I watched carefully, documenting reactions, timing, and inconsistencies, all of which would serve as further proof should anyone question my claims. The final stage of my plan was not public spectacle, it was private validation. I contacted long-lost friends, collaborators, and allies who had witnessed the injustices firsthand, sharing my findings and gathering corroboration. Their support fortified my position, giving me both confidence and strategic advantage. As I sat in my quiet apartment late at night, reviewing every email, post, and conversation, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was not reacting to the world. I was shaping it, rewriting it, and reclaiming it on my terms. Every deception, every act of erasure, Every calculated slight was now accounted for, documented, and ready to be exposed if necessary. The fire within me, once smoldering beneath years of suppression, now blazed brightly, illuminating the path ahead. And as I looked out the window at the city lights, I realized that the Blair Cade who had once been invisible, erased, and dismissed was gone. In her place stood a version of myself unrecognizable to those who had tried to diminish me, strategic, powerful, and unyielding, ready to take full control of my life and my story. The day I had been preparing for finally arrived, a day when subtlety would meet precision, and truth would finally pierce through years of deception. I had arranged a private meeting with the board of the Keats Foundation, an opportunity to present my comprehensive dossier of achievements, manipulations, and misattributions. Walking into the glass-walled boardroom, I felt a calm intensity settle over me. Every step, every breath, every gesture had been rehearsed, yet I allowed it to feel natural, unforced, human. I set up my laptop, connected the presentation, and began speaking, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity, authority, and undeniable evidence. Timeline by timeline, project by project, I demonstrated how my contributions had been systematically overlooked, how Isolde and others had manipulated perceptions, and how the narrative of my life had been rewritten by those I had once trusted. As I spoke, I observed the subtle reactions: raised eyebrows, shifted seats, nervous glances. Each response was validation of my preparation, a quiet acknowledgement that the truth I had meticulously documented was finally breaking through. I watched Isolde in particular, her polished composure beginning to crack, the confidence she had relied on for years wavering under the weight of incontrovertible facts. When I finished, I allowed a moment of silence, letting the evidence breathe, letting it settle in the minds of those present. The board members exchanged looks, their murmurs affirming the reality they were witnessing: a life and career misrepresented, a narrative manipulated, and a woman finally reclaiming her own story. After the meeting, whispers spread throughout the organization. Colleagues I had once considered distant or indifferent approached me privately, offering congratulations, acknowledgement, and even apologies. The tide had shifted. Where once I had been invisible, I was now recognized, validated, and respected. Social media and professional circles quickly mirrored the change, as posts began circulating that credited me appropriately, shared my achievements, and highlighted my strategic brilliance. Each acknowledgement, each mention, each verified correction felt like a small victory in the larger tapestry I was weaving. But Blair Cade was not satisfied with small victories. The emotional climax of my plan involved a personal reckoning with those who had shaped my past: Isolde and my mother, Velma. I had documented every lie, every act of erasure, every betrayal, and I knew the precise moment to confront them would be both private and unforgettable. The meeting was set in my apartment, neutral territory, carefully controlled. I prepared for the encounter as one would prepare for battle, yet my weapons were truth, evidence, and the calm authority of someone who had already won. When they arrived, I greeted them with composure, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle them. I presented my evidence: emails, photos, contracts, screenshots, each one a mirror reflecting the manipulation and deceit they had perpetrated. They attempted deflections, charm, and excuses, but I met each with unwavering clarity, pointing out inconsistencies, lies, and patterns of control. Their faces went pale as the truth unfolded, each revelation a blow they could not counter. Velma's voice quivered, Isolde's confidence shattered, and I realized the psychological shift was complete. I wasn't seeking revenge for spectacle. I was restoring balance, claiming my narrative, and asserting my presence in a life they had attempted to dominate. As they left, defeated and silent, I felt an overwhelming sense of release. The years of suppression, erasure, and manipulation were finally countered by a single, decisive act: the assertion of truth, backed by evidence, strategy, and unwavering self-possession. That night, I reflected on the journey, the girl who had been invisible, erased, and dismissed, and the woman I had become, strategic, powerful, and undeniably present. The fire that had once simmered quietly beneath layers of suppression now blazed fully, illuminating the path ahead, a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the relentless pursuit of justice. I understood that this moment was not just an endpoint, it was a transformation, the culmination of years of preparation, endurance, and calculated action. Blair Cade, once invisible, was now fully recognized, fully realized, and fully empowered, a force shaped not by vengeance alone but by the strategic reclamation of truth, identity, and dignity. The days after the confrontation were unlike anything I had ever experienced. There was a strange combination of relief, empowerment, and an almost eerie quiet, as if the world itself had paused to let the weight of the truth settle. The Keats Foundation's acknowledgement of my work spread steadily, like ripples across a still lake, and colleagues who had once skirted around me now treated me with a mix of respect and cautious curiosity. Social media buzzed with recognition. Messages, congratulations, and inquiries poured in, each one reinforcing the sense that I had finally claimed my rightful space in both professional and personal spheres. Yet, amid the validation, a subtle tension lingered. Isolde and Velma had retreated, their presence diminished but not entirely gone, shadows of manipulation still threatening to surface. I had anticipated this. My preparations had accounted for their persistence, but even so, seeing them disappear into silence carried its own weight, a reminder that victory was never truly complete as long as unresolved threads remained. In this quiet aftermath, I took time for introspection. I reflected on the years of erasure, the subtle manipulations, and the deliberate undermining I had endured. Every insult, omission, and betrayal now served as fuel, a reminder of my resilience and the careful strategy that had brought me to this point. The girl who had once accepted invisibility was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable even to herself, a woman capable of patience, precision, and calculated action. I realized that the reclamation of my narrative was more than public recognition. It was a reclaiming of my own self-worth, autonomy, and agency. Every decision I had made, every conversation, every post, every private inquiry had been a deliberate step toward that realization. I allowed myself to acknowledge the personal growth alongside the professional victories. For the first time in years, I slept without the weight of fear pressing against my chest, without the gnawing anxiety of being unseen, unheard, or dismissed. Yet, I remained vigilant. I documented the aftermath meticulously, anticipating any ripple effects or retaliatory moves from those I had confronted. Strategy, I reminded myself, did not end with a single victory. It was continuous, evolving with each new circumstance. Even in moments of reflection, I was alert, aware of the potential for deception, and ready to respond with the same precision that had brought me here. Friends and allies who had supported me along the way noticed a change. They remarked on my calm confidence, my sharp clarity, and the almost imperceptible edge I now carried. I allowed myself quiet pride, but I also remained grounded, recognizing that true empowerment came not from external validation alone but from the steady knowledge of my own competence and resilience. I began to plan for the future, envisioning projects, collaborations, and personal initiatives that would cement my reputation, not just as a survivor of manipulation but as a creator, leader, and visionary. The fire within me, once smoldering beneath layers of suppression, now burned with a steady intensity, guiding every decision and action. I understood that while Isolde and Velma had been central figures in my journey, my story was no longer defined by them. The narrative had shifted, I was its author. And in this new chapter, I could shape outcomes, forge alliances, and pursue ambitions without the shadow of their interference looming over me. As I walked through the city streets one evening, observing the lights, the movement, the quiet rhythms of life, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The world was the same, yet it felt different, expanded, more accommodating, as if it had recognized the truth I had long sought to assert. And amid this reflection, I made a silent vow to remain vigilant, to continue shaping my story with care, precision, and integrity, and to never allow anyone else to dictate the terms of my life again. Blair Cade, once invisible and erased, now stood fully realized, empowered, and prepared to navigate whatever challenges remained with clarity, strategy, and unwavering self-possession. Weeks passed, and the impact of my efforts began to crystallize into tangible outcomes. Invitations to speak at events, collaborate on projects, and contribute to publications flooded in, each one affirming the authority and credibility I had fought so hard to reclaim. The validation was no longer just professional, it was deeply personal. I could finally see myself clearly, unfiltered by the manipulations of others. Blair Cade, the woman who had once been silenced and diminished, now moved through the world with a confident grace, fully aware of her worth and influence. Yet, even amid these victories, I knew that some payoffs required patience and subtlety. Isolde, though professionally marginalized by the undeniable clarity of the evidence I had presented, still lingered at the edges of my life, a cautionary reminder of past struggles. Velma, whose attempts at control had long shadowed my personal choices, began to confront her own limitations. Through quiet observation, I noted the gradual erosion of their networks of influence and the subtle reputational damage that followed from their exposure. It was not cruel revenge. It was simply the natural consequence of truth coming to light. And I found a measure of satisfaction in witnessing it unfold without direct confrontation, proof that the strategic approach I had cultivated was more powerful than impulsive retaliation. I spent time reconnecting with people I had lost touch with during the years of manipulation, mentors, colleagues, and friends who had once been close but had drifted away under the weight of my suppressed visibility. These reconnections were not only emotionally fulfilling but also reinforced the sense that my life had realigned with authenticity and purpose. Each interaction reminded me of the resilience I had developed, the meticulous planning I had executed, and the emotional intelligence that had guided every decision. More importantly, I found peace in the knowledge that I no longer had to prove myself constantly. The world, having witnessed the evidence of my contributions and integrity, now reflected the reality I had long known to be true. In quiet moments, I allowed myself to acknowledge the depth of transformation I had undergone. I had moved from a state of invisibility, fear, and self-doubt to one of clarity, authority, and self-possession. The fire within me, once concealed beneath layers of suppression and compromise, now burned with a steady, controlled intensity. I realized that the most profound revenge had been internal, reclaiming my own voice, self-respect, and power. The subtle, strategic dismantling of manipulative influences around me became almost secondary, a natural byproduct of my commitment to truth, competence, and authenticity. Even as life returned to a new rhythm, I remained vigilant, documenting interactions, maintaining professional clarity, and ensuring that the lessons of the past guided future decisions. Blair Cade's story was no longer dictated by others. It was authored with intention, strategy, and foresight. And in this space of empowerment, I discovered an unexpected gift: the ability to mentor, guide, and inspire others who had faced similar suppression, showing them that reclaiming one's narrative was possible with patience, precision, and unwavering self-belief. As I closed my laptop one evening, reflecting on the journey from invisibility to recognition, I felt a profound sense of closure. Not the kind born of final confrontation or dramatic revelation, but the kind that comes from knowing one has fought with intelligence, integrity, and emotional resilience. I had turned the page on past betrayals, reasserted my identity, and quietly yet decisively reshaped my world. Blair Cade was no longer defined by the shadows of others. She was defined by her choices, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to the truth. And in that quiet, powerful moment, I understood something essential. The ultimate victory had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had always been about proving myself right, reclaiming my story, and stepping fully into the life I was meant to lead, unshaken, unstoppable, and fully unapologetically seen. Even with the tides of recognition and achievement firmly in my favor, a quiet restlessness occasionally stirred within me, a reminder that life's equilibrium was never absolute. The victories I had secured, though monumental, were built on painstaking strategy and careful observation, and that awareness kept me grounded. Each day brought new interactions, new challenges, and new opportunities to apply the lessons learned from years of being undervalued and manipulated. I had learned that power without vigilance could quickly be eroded, and that authenticity demanded not only courage but also constant self-reflection. Walking through the city streets, observing the ebb and flow of life, I noticed patterns in human behavior that mirrored the lessons I had internalized, the subtle dominance of influence, the quiet persistence of envy, and the ease with which perception could be shaped. Where once I might have been passive or reactive, now I approached the world with calculated observation, a measured patience, and a clear sense of priorities. Even in social gatherings, I could feel the lingering echoes of past dynamics, the cautious glances of those who had once sought to undermine me, the unspoken calculations of colleagues now wary of overstepping. But these were no longer sources of anxiety. They were indicators of a landscape I could navigate with expertise, aware of potential pitfalls, yet empowered by clarity and evidence. I dedicated time to reflection, journaling the evolution of my thoughts and emotions, acknowledging the shifts in perspective that had accompanied my journey. Each entry reinforced the understanding that my life was now authored intentionally, every decision a conscious assertion of agency rather than a reactive response to external pressures. I cultivated mindfulness, not as a means of retreat but as a tool for strategic presence, observing circumstances without being dominated by them, listening before acting, and responding with precision. Occasionally, messages or subtle reminders from Isolde or Velma surfaced, an email, a passive-aggressive comment, a misattributed recognition, but these no longer destabilized me. I had developed resilience, a buffer of insight and preparation that allowed me to respond appropriately or, more often, to let them fade into insignificance. The emotional mastery I had achieved was perhaps the most profound payoff of all. Where anger, fear, or insecurity had once governed my reactions, now clarity, composure, and foresight prevailed. I could choose when to engage, when to withdraw, and when simply to observe, understanding that inaction could be as powerful as action when guided by strategy. At night, when the city quieted and the rush of daily life subsided, I sometimes allowed myself to revisit memories of the girl I had once been, timid, invisible, and constrained by manipulation. It was never with regret, but with acknowledgement of the distance traveled. The contrast between then and now served as both motivation and affirmation, a testament to the transformative power of patience, planning, and unwavering self-belief. In this reflective space, I also considered the broader implications of my journey, the responsibility that came with visibility, influence, and recognition. Blair Cade, once hidden and silenced, now had the capacity to shape not only her own narrative but also to guide, support, and mentor others navigating similar struggles. This awareness infused my actions with purpose, reminding me that empowerment was not purely personal, it could ripple outward, affecting the lives and trajectories of others. And yet, beneath the calm surface of achievement and acknowledgement, a subtle tension remained, an acknowledgement that life was dynamic and that the balance of power, perception, and truth required constant attention. This was not fear but mindfulness, a strategic alertness that ensured I remained both grounded and prepared. Blair Cade had reclaimed her story, reasserted her agency, and solidified her identity, but she had also become a custodian of her own journey, vigilant, reflective, and ever-evolving, fully aware that the pursuit of authenticity and empowerment was not a singular event but an ongoing practice, a lifelong commitment to truth, presence, and unwavering self-possession. With the turbulence of past struggles gradually fading, I found myself embracing a new rhythm of life, one defined by deliberate choice, authentic relationships, and the pursuit of meaningful ambitions. The victories I had achieved were no longer just milestones, they were foundations for the next chapter, platforms from which to expand my influence, creativity, and personal growth. I dedicated time to cultivating connections that were genuine, recognizing the rare value of trust and loyalty after years of navigating deception and manipulation. Friends and colleagues who had remained supportive throughout my journey now became pillars of mutual encouragement, collaborators in shared endeavors, and sources of inspiration for new projects that stretched the boundaries of my creativity. In parallel, I pursued professional ambitions with renewed vigor. Opportunities that had once seemed inaccessible now appeared with clarity and timing that felt almost serendipitous. Each decision was grounded in strategy, informed by past lessons, and guided by a vision of long-term growth rather than fleeting recognition. The process was empowering, turning ideas into action, challenges into lessons, and uncertainty into deliberate opportunity. I also began to explore personal projects that had long been shelved, dreams I had once considered too risky or impractical. Writing, mentoring, and creative collaborations became outlets not only for expression but also for legacy building, ways to share the hard-earned knowledge of navigating complex social and professional landscapes. At the same time, I maintained a vigilant awareness of the ever-shifting dynamics of influence and perception. Even as Isolde and Velma receded further into the background, I understood that human interactions could evolve in unpredictable ways, and that maintaining authenticity required ongoing attention, discernment, and sometimes restraint. I learned to appreciate the subtle balance between visibility and privacy, action and reflection, ambition and patience. Socially, I rediscovered joys I had once neglected: the simple pleasure of shared laughter, the quiet intimacy of meaningful conversation, and the comfort of being fully present in relationships unclouded by manipulation or hidden agendas. These moments, though small, were profound reminders of the life I had fought to reclaim and of the self I had earned through resilience and determination. Professionally, my reputation solidified further, not only through accomplishments but through the integrity and consistency with which I navigated challenges. People began to seek my perspective, respect my judgment, and recognize my authority without the need for overt assertion. This quiet acknowledgement felt more powerful than public accolades, a testament to the strength of substance over spectacle. Amid all of this, I nurtured a sense of personal growth that transcended achievement or recognition. I reflected on the emotional resilience I had cultivated, the strategic patience I had exercised, and the clarity of vision that had guided me through treacherous terrain. These qualities became intrinsic, shaping every choice and interaction, infusing my life with a sense of grounded purpose that no external validation could replace. And yet, there remained a spark of ambition, an eagerness to explore new horizons, to challenge myself in ways that stretched beyond past experiences, to embrace uncertainty as an opportunity for growth rather than a source of fear. Blair Cade, once constrained by the shadows of manipulation, now stood fully in the light of her own potential, aware of the power of careful planning, emotional intelligence, and relentless pursuit of authenticity. As I looked toward the future, I felt a profound sense of agency, the knowledge that life could be shaped, dreams realized, and challenges transformed into milestones through strategy, courage, and unwavering self-belief. In the quiet moments of reflection, I understood that the journey was never truly over, that growth and empowerment were continuous, evolving processes. But for the first time in years, I experienced a deep, abiding confidence that no obstacle, no subtle manipulation, and no lingering shadow could diminish the power, clarity, and self-possession I had fought to reclaim. And in that certainty, I discovered the most enduring triumph of all: the freedom to author my own narrative, to pursue my own ambitions, and to live fully as the architect of my life, unbound, unapologetic, and fully realized. As the years unfolded, I found a profound sense of peace in the life I had meticulously rebuilt. The storms of past betrayals and manipulations had left scars, yes, but they had also forged resilience, wisdom, and an unshakable sense of self. Blair Cade, once a shadowed presence, now existed fully in her own light, defined not by the deceit of others but by her own choices, integrity, and relentless pursuit of authenticity. I dedicated time to mentoring those who faced similar struggles, offering guidance, encouragement, and strategies drawn from experience, understanding that true empowerment often came from shared knowledge and mutual support. In these interactions, I saw reflections of my younger self, hesitant, overlooked, yearning for recognition and validation, but now with the hope and determination to navigate their paths with courage and clarity. Professionally, my reputation continued to grow, not through ostentatious displays of success but through quiet consistency, the trust one cultivated, and the undeniable impact of my contributions. People sought my counsel, respected my judgment, and recognized my authority without ego or force, a testament to the power of earned credibility and strategic patience. Personally, I nurtured relationships that were authentic and sustaining, connecting deeply with friends, partners, and colleagues who shared values of trust, honesty, and mutual growth. These connections became sources of joy, inspiration, and grounding, reminding me that life's true rewards were not only in achievement but in meaningful human bonds. Even the subtle remnants of past adversaries, Isolde, Velma, and others, no longer cast shadows over my life. Their attempts at manipulation, once a source of stress and uncertainty, had become mere echoes of history, reminders of challenges overcome and lessons learned. I understood now that power, influence, and reputation were fluid, but that the principles of authenticity, strategy, and resilience were enduring. In quiet moments of reflection, I acknowledged the journey from invisibility to recognition, from self-doubt to self-possession, from fear to confident agency. Each chapter of struggle had imparted a lesson, each obstacle an opportunity to grow, and each moment of clarity a reaffirmation of the strength within me. I embraced the understanding that life would continue to present complexities and challenges, but that I now possessed the tools, emotional intelligence, strategic insight, and unwavering self-belief to navigate them with grace and precision. Blair Cade's story was no longer dictated by circumstance, fear, or the manipulations of others. It was authored intentionally, guided by purpose, and enriched by the wisdom gained from experience. And as I stood on the threshold of new endeavors, opportunities, and relationships, I carried with me the quiet satisfaction of having reclaimed my narrative, reasserted my agency, and proven to myself, most importantly, that resilience, strategy, and authenticity could transform even the darkest challenges into enduring triumphs. The ultimate victory was not in the downfall of others or in fleeting recognition. It was in the reclamation of self, the mastery of one's own story, and the freedom to live fully, unapologetically, and with unwavering clarity. And in that freedom, I found the most profound closure, the knowledge that Blair Cade was no longer a character shaped by fear, suppression, or external control, but a woman of vision, courage, and integrity, ready to face the future with poise, confidence, and limitless possibility. The journey had been long, often painful, and marked by challenges that once seemed insurmountable, yet it had culminated in a life of purpose, empowerment, and self-defined destiny. In this, I realized, was the truest triumph of all, living a life authored by truth, guided by wisdom, and illuminated by the light of one's own unshakable resolve.